Science and Certainty, Part 1 of 4. This essay wasn't born out of skepticism toward science. It was born out of respect for it. Because once you really appreciate what science is, careful, provisional, self-correcting, you start to notice when the tone sometimes drifts away from that spirit. And nowhere does that drift feel more obvious than when people talk about the beginning of the universe. Every now and then, you'll hear a sentence that doesn't just suggest a model, it declares a cosmic verdict. Stephen Hawking, with Leonard Mlodinow, wrote, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing." Lawrence Krauss, in a similar mood, argues that modern physics suggests getting something from nothing is not a problem. And Sean Carroll, being more candid about the culture of the field, notes that most working cosmologists have practiced explanations for why there is no such thing as before the Big Bang. These are brilliant minds. I'm not quoting them to shit on them. I'm quoting them because they show the exact tension I want to highlight. Sometimes the scientific method stays humble while the language gets a bit too sure, too final. Like we've reached bedrock, when really we've reached the edge of the map, and we're sketching sea monsters. Just so I'm clear, I recognize that multiple independent lines of evidence strongly support the hot Big Bang model. We see the universe expanding, and we see the cosmic microwave background. Taken together, they strongly point to an early phase of the universe that was hotter, denser, and more compact than anything we can experience now. The issue isn't science is bad. The problem is overreach in tone, right at the point where the physics becomes the least secure. Because the earliest moment we talk about isn't a filmed event. It's an extrapolation. And extrapolations are where confident-sounding sentences quietly become philosophical claims in a lab coat. When someone says, the universe created itself from nothing, or there is no before, that may very well turn out to be right. But it's not the same kind of right as something we've actually pinned down with observation. A lot of it depends on what you mean by nothing, what you mean by cause, and whether time itself is part of the thing you're trying to explain. That's what inspired this essay. It's a call for intellectual humility, which is a core Mystrikal value. I'm not meaning to undermine science, quite the opposite. Mystriks hold the methods of science in the highest esteem, along with carefully verified knowledge and logical reason. But I also want to keep the tone honest, right where reality gets slippery. And honestly, some of the best scientists and scientific commentators do precisely that. Brian Cox, for example, says the Big Bang might mark the beginning of time, but also admits we're not sure that's when time began, and that we don't know whether the universe even had a beginning. That kind of phrasing sounds more like science doing what science does, pushing forward while still respecting the unknown and the limits of our knowledge. So I'm not asking for less curiosity. I'm asking for fewer victory laps at the border of ignorance. Sometimes the most scientific sentence in the room is still, I don't know yet. Science and Certainty, Part 2 of 4. Lessons from Scientific History. To see why this matters, you don't even need to stay in cosmology. History gives us plenty of stories where confident answers later turned out to be incomplete. For decades, doctors told us that stomach ulcers were caused by stress, spicy food, or lifestyle. It was common medical advice. Then, in the 1980s, Dr. Barry Marshall and Dr. Robin Warren shook the world. They showed that Helicobacter pylori, a bacterium, causes most ulcers. Legend has it that Marshall even drank a culture of the bacteria to prove it. This overturned decades of expert consensus. It humbles us to remember that experts can be wrong when evidence is lacking. In that case, relying on experiment and data revealed a truth no one expected. A similar reversal occurred in genetics. When the first human genome was sequenced, scientists found that only a tiny fraction of the genome encoded proteins. The rest was called junk DNA. Even Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's structure, called most of it little better than junk. For years, most textbooks repeated that story. Then, new research, notably the ENCODE project, found that many junk regions actually regulate our genes. In fact, Ewan Birney, an ENCODE leader, now says we should totally expunge the term junk DNA from our vocabulary. He admitted that we were simply ignorant of our own ignorance about the genome. In other words, many scientists once underestimated how much remains to learn. These discoveries are progress. We corrected ourselves, but they also remind us to hold our claims lightly until the data arrives. And new data almost always does. In neuroscience, too, we've learned to rethink old assumptions. It used to be virtual dogma that the adult human brain was static. Use it or lose it, paraphrasing the textbooks, implying little change after maturity. Today we know the brain is remarkably plastic. New neurons grow, connections rewire with experience. Your brain can change well into adulthood. That's a massive reversal of thinking. It teaches us that what was once impossible is often possible, given more evidence. Again, humility in science means being ready to update our understanding when reality surprises us. And consider the human microbiome, the community of trillions of microbes living in and on us. For most of history, we barely thought about these organisms. Suddenly, we've learned they are essential to digestion, immunity, and even mental health. Today, we know that we are not alone in our bodies. Each person is home to trillions of bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms. And scientists are now rapidly improving their understanding of the role that this microbiota has in health and disease. That was a humbling discovery. The self we thought we were is really an ecosystem. It taught medicine to pay attention to outside organisms as part of our very selves. Each of these stories, ulcers, junk DNA, plastic brains, buzzing microbiomes, carries the same message. Scientific knowledge evolves. Certainty can fade with new evidence. We used to explain everything simply, and then nature inevitably and continually reminds us it's more complex than we know or even imagine. These are victories for science. But they also underscore a mystrikal lesson. Be honest about what we know, admit what we don't, and don't be so certain in your use of language. Science and Certainty, Part 3 of 4. Communication with Humility. So what does this mean for how we talk about science? It means communicating honestly. When a scientist says, "We are absolutely certain," or uses an analogy like south of the South Pole, it makes for a crisp soundbite. But perhaps it also trims away humility and wonder. If people only hear confident certainties, they might think there is no mystery left, or that the matter is completely settled, and that's rarely true if ever. Mystrikism teaches that truth does not require pretending we have all the answers. On the contrary, leaving room for uncertainty invites curiosity and trust. Imagine a talk, a podcast, or a public lecture. Instead of saying, "We know the Big Bang had no singularity," one might say, "Based on modern physics, it appears there was no classical singularity, and time itself may have come into existence then." A little less certainty in the voice is often more honest, and almost as important, sounds that way too. Or, when explaining a new discovery, one can acknowledge the puzzle it solves while also hinting at what remains unknown. For example, the genome surprised us. It turns out much of what we once called junk DNA has functions we didn't expect. Mystrikism calls this blend of honesty, humility, and realism the heart of good science communication. Being honest means we stick to the evidence we have. Being humble means we're willing to say, "I don't know yet," when appropriate. And being real means we don't sugarcoat. We tell people exactly what the data suggests, without the undue spin of absolute certainty. Together, they help sapient beings learn the best current approximation of objective truth and respect the process of science. In practice, this might look like a speaker pausing just for a beat before a bold statement and then deliberately widening the frame. Based on what we know right now. or this is our best explanation so far, or even, of course, new research may refine or change the picture. It might also look like choosing words that match the actual strength of the evidence. When scientists use cautious phrasing like suggests, could be, based on current data, so far, evidence to date shows, or likely, that isn't weakness, waffle, or indecision. It's intellectual hygiene. It's not overstating your case, not claiming you've seen the whole picture when you've only lit up a small corner of it. And it matters because our language shapes how people think science works and what is and isn't true. If we speak in absolutes all the time, people start to think science is a book of final answers. But when we speak with calibrated confidence, cautiously strong where the evidence is strong and more humble where the evidence is thin, we teach the public the real ethic underneath the method: respect for the unknown, respect for doubt, and respect for truth itself. Science and Certainty, Part 4 of 4. The Mystrikal Way of Knowing. Mystrikism values the unknown as something to revere, simply meaning awe and respect, not a gap to fear. The universe is vast and often perplexing. We live in a tiny speck, asking big questions. So when a brilliant mind like Hawking speaks with boldness, of course we listen, but we also listen to the silence after the words. If they suggest there was no before the Big Bang, we acknowledge and consider it respectfully. But as mystrics, we might also say, softly, maybe, maybe not. We don't know yet for certain. The whole truth is still out there. This approach does not weaken science, it strengthens it. When scientists say, we are sure on firm ground, and experts should say it when justified, that confidence matters. But when we venture into the truly unknown, Mystrikal honesty says, we're learning. This is our best guess, but it might change. That honesty builds trust, and humility sparks wonder. Mystrikism teaches that honesty, humility, and realism must go hand in hand in communication. We report evidence faithfully. We acknowledge the limits of that evidence. We invite our audience to share in the awe of discovery. If they're left feeling, wow, there's so much we still don't know, then we've done our job. Because in the Mystrikal view, reverence for mystery is our higher power, and truth is always worth the pause. So yes, be confident, but also be bold enough to say, I might be wrong. Wear the provisional language proudly, for it signals a mind courageous enough to acknowledge uncertainty. As Mystrikism teaches, intellectual humility is not a weakness but the highest strength. It is through doubt, curiosity, and wonder, not dogma, that we move closer to reality. In the end, the greatest mystery is reality itself. And it is in that humble sense of wonder, in trusting nature's endless surprises, that we find true wisdom,